In the year 1191, in the marshy fields of Somerset, England, a group of monks began to dig. They weren't searching for treasure. They were chasing a ghost. Acting on a tip from a dying king, they dug 7 feet down, hitting a solid stone slab and a heavy lead cross. The inscription was chilling. Hic ius et sepultus inclitus rex Arturius in insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. But what they found beneath it was even more shocking. Not one skeleton but 2. The first was a woman's, her golden hair still miraculously intact. The second was a man's, and it was gigantic. The monks claimed the skeleton measured over 8 feet tall, the frame of a literal giant from a forgotten age. His skull was a roadmap of violence, bearing the marks of at least 10 grievous wounds, one of which appeared to be the final fatal blow. For centuries, this was considered the definitive proof, the end of the story. But modern historians have uncovered a darker truth. The timing was too perfect, the discovery too convenient, the story too good to be true. And it raises the single most important question about the legend. Was the grave at Glastonbury Abbey the greatest archaeological find in history? Or was it the beginning of a sophisticated 1,000-year-old lie, designed to crush a rebellion and rewrite history forever? To find the real Arthur, we can't start with a sword in a stone or a castle at Camelot. We have to start with this grave. Because the truth isn't just about whether a king named Arthur existed. It's about why a world in flames became so desperate for a hero, they may have been willing to invent one from scratch. To understand the mystery, you first have to understand the silence. For the most famous king in Western history, the man whose name defines an entire era of chivalry and romance, the historical record is deafeningly quiet. Go back to the time he supposedly lived, the late 5th and early 6th centuries, and there is not a single contemporary mention of his name. Not one. No coins minted in his honor, no laws passed under his authority, no chronicles written by his court. It's a phantom kingdom, led by a ghost. This is the great paradox of King Arthur. He is everywhere and he is nowhere. He is a cultural titan, yet a historical whisper. So where does this search begin? It begins in the smoking ruins of a superpower. It begins with the end of the world. For 400 years, Britain was a cog in the mightiest machine the world had ever known, the Roman Empire. It was a land of heated villas, paved roads, organized legions, and imported wine. It was a world of order, of law, of a predictable future. And then, in the year 410 AD, it all fell apart. The legions were recalled to defend a dying Rome, and the province of Britannia was cut loose, abandoned. Imagine if today the entire federal government of the United States, the military, the interstate highway system, the power grid, the entire economic framework, simply vanished overnight. That is the scale of the cataclysm that befell Britain. What followed was not a fairy tale. It was a nightmare. A dark age in the truest sense of the word. The great Roman roads fell into disrepair, reclaimed by weeds and forest. The stone villas were abandoned, their intricate mosaics cracking under the cold English rain, as locals huddled for warmth in crude wooden huts. Literacy plummeted. Society fractured. The island devolved into a patchwork of petty warlords and squabbling kings, each ruling a territory no larger than a modern American county. It was a world of profound and terrifying insecurity. And into this vacuum from across the North Sea came a new threat. They arrived first as raiders, then as mercenaries, and finally as invaders. They were the Angles, the Jutes, and the Saxons, fierce pagan warriors from Germany and Denmark, looking for new land to conquer. They saw a broken Britain not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. The historical accounts that survive from this period paint a horrifying picture. They speak of fire and slaughter, of cities put to the torch, of priests cut down at their own altars. They describe a wave of refugees, the native Romanized Britons, the ancestors of the Welsh, fleeing westward, always westward, away from the Saxon blades, into the mountains of Wales and the peninsula of Cornwall. This was not a battle. It was an apocalypse. A slow-motion ethnic cleansing that lasted for generations. This is the world that needed a savior. Not a king in a shining castle, but a warlord forged in fire and blood. A leader who could halt the tide. For decades it seemed no one could. The Britons were disorganized, feuding amongst themselves, unable to mount a united defense. The Saxon advance seemed unstoppable. And then something changed. The tide of the invasion, which had been crashing relentlessly west, suddenly stopped. and for a generation it was even pushed back. Around the year 500, the Britons rallied and achieved a stunning, decisive victory at a place called the Battle of Badon Hill. It was a victory so complete that it halted the Saxon conquest for 50 years, creating a brief, fleeting golden age of peace and stability. A near-contemporary writer, a British monk named Gildas, wrote about this battle in a blistering sermon called On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain. He describes the siege, the desperation, and the final shocking victory of his people. It was the defining moment of the age, the moment the Britons fought back and won. Gildas credits the victory to the leadership of one man, a man he describes as the last of the noble Romans left on the island. But in the most maddening puzzle in all of British history, he never says his name. The first writer to finally attach a name to this great British victory appears almost 300 years later, in a Welsh text called the Historia Brittonum, the History of the Britons. It's a jumbled collection of notes, genealogies, and battle lists. But buried within it is a chapter on the wars against the Saxons, and it lists 12 great battles fought by a single legendary warrior. At the final battle, the Battle of Badon Hill, this text claims the British champion single-handedly killed 960 men in one charge. And for the first time in the historical record, we are given his name, Arthur. But this text, the very first to name our hero, gives him a title that has been misunderstood for centuries. It does not call him a king. It calls him the Dux Bellorum, the Duke of Battles, a commander, a warlord. And this small, crucial detail changes everything we think we know about the man who would become the once and future king. To understand what a Duke of Battles truly was, you have to erase every image you have of Camelot. Forget the soaring white towers, the silk banners, and the noble knights jousting for a lady's favor. The Britain that forged this commander was not a kingdom of romance. It was a corpse left behind by the greatest empire the world had ever known. For nearly 400 years, Britannia had been a cog in the vast, intricate machine of Rome. It had Roman roads, Roman laws, Roman legions, Roman villas with heated floors and intricate mosaics. It was, for the elite at least, an island of order at the edge of the known world. Then, in the year 410 AD, the machine broke. Rome, besieged by enemies at its heart, pulled its legions out of Britain and never came back. The message to the Britons was simple and brutal: you are on your own. And suddenly the world fell apart. Imagine a modern society if, overnight, the national government, the army, the police, and the power grid all vanished. That's what happened to Britain. The Roman roads that once carried legions and trade now became highways for bandits and invaders. The cities, once centers of commerce, began to crumble, their stone walls a hollow promise of a security that no longer existed. A cold, damp darkness began to creep back into the land. Into this power vacuum, predators swarmed. From the north, the painted Picts swept down from the highlands of what we now call Scotland, raiding with savage ferocity. From the west, the Scotti of Ireland crossed the sea in their longboats, plundering the coastlines. But the greatest threat, the existential threat, came from the east. Across the grey, churning North Sea came the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. At first they were raiders seeking treasure. Then they came as mercenaries, hired by desperate British chieftains to fight their other enemies. And finally they came as invaders. They saw a rich, fertile land, its defenders scattered and disorganized, and they decided to take it for themselves. This was not a war of gentlemen. This was a war of annihilation. The Romano-British, clinging to the fading light of their Roman past, were fighting an enemy that followed different gods and spoke a different tongue. The Saxons fought with a terrifying resolve. Their core tactic was the shield wall, a brutal interlocking wall of wood, leather, and iron bristling with spears. It was a human grinding machine, an infantry formation that advanced slowly, inexorably, crushing everything in its path. For decades, the Britons were losing. Petty kings and local tyrants, unable to unite, were picked off one by one. Their kingdoms were swallowed. Their people were displaced or enslaved. The very idea of Britain was being erased settlement by settlement. They needed a new kind of leader. Not another squabbling king trying to protect his own small patch of land. They needed someone who could think bigger. Someone who could fight the new enemy with the old deadly magic of Rome. This is the world that called for a Dux Bellorum. This wasn't a hereditary title. You didn't become the Duke of Battles because of your father. You earned it. You earned it with blood, with strategy, and with victory. A Dux Bellorum was a supreme military commander, chosen by the remaining British kings to lead their combined forces. He was a professional. He was the last echo of a Roman general on British soil. And his weapon was not the shield wall. His weapon was the horse. The Romans had perfected the use of heavy cavalry, the cataphract, armored riders on powerful war horses, acting as a shock force to shatter enemy lines. This tradition didn't simply vanish when the legions left. It survived in the military elite of Romano-British society. These men, the equites, were the descendants of Roman officers. They had the wealth to own good armor and expensive war horses. They were a warrior class, a brotherhood of steel. They were, in essence, the first knights. And the man who led them, this warlord, this Artorius, was likely one of them. He wasn't a king sitting on a throne. He was a mobile commander, living in the saddle. His kingdom was the back of his horse. His court was his warband, his comitatus, a band of loyal mounted warriors who followed him not because of a flag, but because he was the best. He kept them alive, and he led them to victory and plunder. This wasn't a feudal army. It was a lethal rapid response unit, the Dark Age equivalent of a special forces team. This historical reality fits the legend like a key in a lock. The earliest Welsh poems don't talk about a grand court at Camelot. They talk about Arthur and his warband, feasting in a smoky hall one night, then riding 100 miles to fight a battle the next day. The famous list of Arthur's 12 battles, recorded in the Historia Brittonum, shows him fighting all over Britain, from the forests of Celadon in the north to the coast of Lindsey in the east. This isn't the pattern of a king defending his borders. This is the pattern of a national commander racing across the country to put out fires, to counter the latest Saxon threat wherever it appeared. He was the ultimate problem solver in an age of chaos. His strategy was simple and devastatingly effective. Use the superior mobility and crushing impact of his heavy cavalry to outmaneuver and break the slow-moving Saxon shield walls. Imagine it. The Saxon infantry, confident in their wall of shields, marching across a field. They hear a low rumble. The rumble becomes a thunder. And then, over the crest of a hill, comes Arthur and his horsemen. Not knights in shining plate armor. That's centuries away. Think leather and steel scale, iron helmets, long spears held couched for the charge. A wave of iron and horseflesh moving at a terrifying speed, aimed like a spearhead at the heart of the Saxon line. The impact would have been apocalyptic. Shields splintering, men screaming. The entire formation cracking open under the unstoppable momentum of the charge. This was how Arthur won. Not with magic, but with superior tactics and a disciplined veteran force. He was the ghost of Rome, returned to haunt its enemies. 4 years he was a phantom of victory for the Britons. He turned the tide. He gave them hope. The Saxon advance, which had seemed unstoppable, began to falter. They were being beaten, and beaten badly, by a commander who seemed to be everywhere at once. And it all culminated in one final titanic engagement, the Battle of Mount Badon. We don't know its exact location. It could have been near the city of Bath, or a hill fort in Wiltshire, or any number of other places. But we know what happened there. Around the year 500, the Saxon armies gathered for a major push, a decisive blow to shatter British resistance once and for all. And Arthur met them. This wasn't a skirmish or a raid. This was the final battle for the soul of Britain. The sources say the fighting was desperate, lasting for days. Gildas, a near-contemporary monk, writes of the final, and not the least, slaughter of the rascals. He doesn't name Arthur, but he describes a singular, crushing British victory that stopped the invasion cold. Later sources are more explicit. The Historia Brittonum claims Arthur himself killed 960 men in a single charge. This is, of course, the stuff of legend, but legends are born from a kernel of truth. And the truth of Badon is that the Britons, led by their Dux Bellorum, achieved the impossible. They didn't just defeat the Saxons, they annihilated them. The victory at Mount Badon was so total, so catastrophic for the Saxons, that it ushered in an era of peace that lasted for a generation. The Saxon migration halted. The invaders were thrown back to their coastal enclaves. For a brief, shining moment, the darkness receded. The Britons could breathe again. They had been pulled back from the brink of extinction. And the man they had to thank for it was Arthur, the Duke of Battles. This period of peace, this age of Arthur, was the memory that would echo down through the centuries. It was the golden age that storytellers would later embellish with magic swords and holy grails. But it was real. It was a peace bought with blood and iron, orchestrated by a brilliant commander who had mastered the art of war. He had saved his people. He had become a living legend. But here lies the great mystery. If he was so successful, so powerful, so revered, why did his golden age end? Why did the Saxons eventually triumph? What happened to the great Dux Bellorum? To be a warlord is to live by the sword, and all too often it means to die by it. The very thing that made Arthur strong, his band of loyal warriors, also contained the seeds of his destruction. Because in a world of warlords, the greatest threat often comes not from the enemy in front of you, but from the ally standing right behind you. To understand this threat, you first have to understand what this band of warriors actually was. It wasn't an army in the way we think of one today, with uniforms and a clear chain of command. It was something far more ancient, more personal, and infinitely more volatile. In the chaos of post-Roman Britain, power wasn't held by institutions. It was held by individuals. Men with enough charisma, enough strength, and enough of a reputation to convince other men to risk their lives and follow them into the fire. Arthur was one of these men. A Dux Bellorum, a leader in war. His authority wasn't granted by a crown or a government. It was earned day by day on the battlefield, and it could be lost just as quickly. His followers weren't salaried soldiers. They were a comitatus, a war band, a brotherhood bound by oaths of personal loyalty. They fought for Arthur the man, not for Britain the abstract idea. In return, they expected two things: victory and a share of the spoils. Land, gold, weapons, status. If Arthur stopped providing those things, his warband would melt away like snow in the spring, leaving him powerless. This was the brutal reality for every warlord. Your power lasted only as long as your winning streak, and this created a huge problem. How do you manage a collection of the most dangerous, ambitious, and ego-driven killers on the island? These weren't humble peasants. They were local chieftains, rival warlords, and champion warriors in their own right, each with their own pride and their own ambitions. In a typical warlord's hall, there was a strict hierarchy. The leader sat at the head of a long table. His most valued lieutenants sat closest to him, a public display of their importance. The further you were from the leader, the less you mattered. This seating arrangement was a constant source of tension, jealousy, and bloody feuds. A squabble over who sat where could tear a warband apart before they ever saw the enemy. And this is where we get to the legendary round table. Now, was there a literal physical round table made of oak or stone? Almost certainly not. The first mention of it doesn't appear for another 600 years, in a French poem. But the idea behind the round table, that is the spark of historical genius that could have made Arthur different. It was a revolutionary concept in a world defined by hierarchy. By seating his warriors at a round table, Arthur symbolically eliminated that hierarchy. At this table, there is no head. There is no foot. Every man seated there is an equal. Every voice matters. Think about the psychological impact of that. Instead of a king ruling over subjects, you have a brotherhood of champions. It's the difference between being a cog in a machine and being a partner in an enterprise. This masterstroke of leadership transformed a volatile collection of rivals into a cohesive unit. It channeled their pride and ambition not against each other, but outwards towards a common enemy. The honor came not from sitting closest to the king, but from being worthy of a seat at the table in the first place. It was a meritocracy forged in steel. To earn your place, you had to be the best. To keep it, you had to prove it again and again. This is what drew the greatest warriors of the age to Arthur's banner. Men like Gawain, fierce and loyal. Kay, his foster brother, steadfast and dependable. Bedivere, the last one by his side at the very end. Each a legend in their own right. But there was one knight whose fame would eventually eclipse them all. A warrior whose skill was so supreme, whose name became synonymous with the very ideal of the knightly champion. A man who represented both the pinnacle of Arthur's vision and the single greatest threat to its existence. His name was Lancelot. And here's a fascinating twist most people don't know. Lancelot is completely absent from the earliest Welsh legends about Arthur. He doesn't exist. He was an invention, a character created centuries later in France by a poet named Crétin de Troyes. The French poets of the 12th century took the gritty, battle-hardened Welsh stories of Arthur and repackaged them. They added castles, chivalry, and the new fashionable idea of courtly love. A secret, idealized, and often tragic love between a knight and a noble lady. And to be the hero of these new stories, they needed a new kind of knight. They needed Lancelot. He was designed from the ground up to be the perfect man, the greatest swordsman, the most courageous warrior, the most courteous gentleman. He was Arthur's champion, his right hand, the living embodiment of the Round Table's ideals. But the poets gave him a fatal flaw, a crack in his perfect armor. He was hopelessly, uncontrollably in love with Arthur's queen Guinevere. While the character of Lancelot might be a literary invention, the archetype he represents is historically very real. Every great warlord had a champion, a lead warrior, a man whose prowess in battle was legendary. This would have been Arthur's most trusted ally, the man he relied on in the most desperate of fights. And this is where the danger lies. The very qualities that make a man the perfect champion, passion, immense pride, a capacity for violence, and a will that bends to no one, also make him the most dangerous possible rival. The story of Lancelot and Guinevere isn't just a medieval romance. It's a political drama about the fundamental weakness at the heart of Arthur's kingdom. Arthur's power was built on personal loyalty. The oaths his knights swore were to him. But what happens when a knight's personal passion becomes stronger than his personal loyalty? The love triangle between Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere became the central tragedy of the entire legend. It represents the collision of duty and desire. Lancelot is torn between his adoration for his king, the man who gave him everything, and his all-consuming love for Guinevere. Guinevere, often portrayed as a passive prize, was in a position of immense influence. Her choice to betray her husband wasn't just an act of infidelity. It was an act of treason that threatened to destabilize the entire political structure Arthur had worked so hard to build. And Arthur, he's the figure of order, the man holding civilization together through sheer force of will. He is either tragically blind to the betrayal happening in the heart of his own court, or perhaps even more tragically, he sees it and chooses to ignore it, hoping to hold his fragile kingdom together. This affair was the poison that seeped into the foundations of Camelot. The Round Table was built on the idea of a perfect, unbreakable brotherhood. But this secret broke it. It proved that even among the best of men, trust was a fragile thing. Created whispers, factions, and jealousy. Knights began to take sides. The perfect unity Arthur had forged began to crack. The very man who was the greatest symbol of the Round Table's strength, Lancelot, the perfect knight, became the agent of its destruction. The enemy wasn't the Saxons at the gate anymore. The enemy was now inside the court, inside the fellowship itself. The conflict was no longer about saving Britain. It was about love, jealousy, and broken oaths. And this internal rot, this deep, personal betrayal, would create the perfect opportunity for another, even darker figure waiting in the shadows. A man with a claim to Arthur's throne and a heart full of hatred, ready to exploit the cracks in the Round Table and bring the entire kingdom crashing down into ruin. His name was Mordred, and to understand the poison that flowed through his veins, we have to go back to the very beginning, to a secret so dark it was buried under the foundations of Camelot itself. Before Guinevere, before the Round Table was even built, a young, newly crowned Arthur attended a festival. There, he was seduced by a beautiful, visiting Queen Morgause, the wife of King Lot of Orkney. It was a night of passion, a king's indiscretion. But what Arthur didn't know, what had been deliberately hidden from him his entire life, was that Morgause was his own half-sister, the daughter of his mother Igraine from her first marriage. From this incestuous union a child was conceived. A boy. Mordred. This was the ultimate sin. A stain on Arthur's soul that could never be washed away. Merlin, the great seer, had a vision. He prophesied that a child born on May Day would one day be the ruin of Arthur and his entire kingdom. Terrified, and not knowing which child it was, Arthur committed the single most monstrous act of his reign. He issued a decree that every noble-born baby born on that fateful May Day be gathered up and set adrift at sea in a rickety, unguided ship. It was a brutal, desperate attempt to cheat fate, a king trying to murder a prophecy. It was Arthur's original sin, a massacre of innocence that would haunt him forever. But fate cannot be cheated. One child, by a stroke of cruel luck or dark magic, survived. The small boat washed ashore, and the infant was found and returned to his mother, Morgause. That child was Mordred. He grew up in the cold, wind-swept courts of the north, far from the light of Camelot. And he was raised on a diet of pure hatred. His mother, Morgause, a powerful sorceress and a bitter rival to Arthur, poisoned his mind day after day. She told him the truth of his birth, that he was the son of the High King, and she told him the story of Arthur's attempt to murder him as a baby. She taught him that Arthur was not a noble hero, but a hypocrite and a tyrant who had stolen his birthright and then tried to snuff out his life. Every triumph of Camelot was, in Mordred's eyes, a personal insult. Every song sung of Arthur's glory was a reminder of the life that was stolen from him. He was forged in resentment, sharpened by a desire for vengeance that burned hotter than any dragon's fire. Years later, a young man appeared at the gates of Camelot. He was handsome, charming, and a fearsomely skilled warrior. He introduced himself as Mordred, son of Queen Morgause. Arthur, seeing this young knight, was overcome with a complex mix of guilt and hope. Perhaps he didn't know the full truth of Mordred's parentage then, or perhaps he did and saw a chance for redemption, a way to right his terrible wrong. Against the advice of many, Arthur welcomed the young man into his inner circle. He gave him a seat at the round table itself. He placed the viper in his own bosom, hoping to tame it with kindness. It was a fatal miscalculation. Mordred played his part perfectly. He was courteous, brave, and outwardly loyal. He became a respected knight, earning the trust of his peers. But behind the smiling mask, he was a master of observation. He watched everything. He saw the pride that was beginning to curdle into arrogance among the knights. He saw the whispers and the jealousies. And most importantly, he saw the stolen glances between Queen Guinevere and Sir Lancelot. He saw the one secret, the one crack in the foundation of Camelot that was large enough to bring the whole castle crashing down. He didn't act immediately. He was patient. He waited as the quest for the Holy Grail drew the best and most virtuous knights, like Galahad and Percival, away from the court, leaving a vacuum of piety and a surplus of worldly ambition. In their absence, the moral fabric of Camelot began to fray. Mordred began to sow his seeds of dissent, not with loud accusations, but with quiet, poisonous whispers. To a knight who felt overlooked, he'd offer sympathy and suggest the king was playing favorites. To another angry over a judgment, he'd murmur that Arthur's laws were perhaps not as just as they once were. He became a confidant to the discontented, a mirror reflecting their own grievances back at them, magnified and distorted. He was building an army not of soldiers, but of resentments. His greatest opportunity, the weapon he had been waiting to deploy, was the affair. He knew that a direct accusation would be his word against the two most beloved people in the kingdom. He needed undeniable proof. He allied himself with his brother, Sir Agravain, a knight who held a long-standing grudge against Lancelot. Together they began to watch, to plot, to set the perfect trap. They waited for a night when King Arthur was away, holding court elsewhere. They knew Lancelot would use the opportunity to visit the queen in her private chambers. Mordred and Agravain gathered a dozen loyal knights, feeding them stories of Lancelot's treason and the dishonor he brought upon their king. They were not just exposing an affair, they were staging a coup in miniature, designed to force a civil war. Under the cover of darkness, they surrounded the queen's chambers. As Lancelot was with Guinevere, Agravain hammered on the door, screaming, "Traitor knight Sir Lancelot, now you are taken." The idyllic dream of Camelot shattered in that instant. Inside panic, Lancelot had no armor, no sword. Guinevere wept, knowing they were doomed. But Lancelot was not just any knight. He was the greatest warrior the world had ever known. Thinking fast, he used a heavy cloak as a makeshift shield, unbarred the door just a crack, and dragged the first knight inside. In the darkness of the chamber, he killed the man and donned his armor and sword. Then he threw the doors wide open. What followed was a massacre. Lancelot, fueled by desperation and righteous fury, cut down the knights who stood against him one by one. Agravain, the instigator, was among the first to fall. Mordred, clever as always, managed to escape, wounded but alive. He had what he wanted. The trap had been sprung. The affair was no longer a secret whispered in corridors. It was a bloody fact, proven by the bodies of a dozen of Arthur's knights lying dead outside his wife's bedroom. When Arthur returned, he was met with a nightmare. Mordred, feigning loyalty and grief, presented the king with the evidence of the queen's treason. The law was absolute. A queen guilty of adultery must be burned at the stake. There were no exceptions, not even for Guinevere. Arthur was broken. The two people he loved most in the world, his wife and his best friend, had betrayed him and in doing so, had handed his greatest enemy the very sword with which to destroy him. He was the king. His first duty was to the law, to the realm. If he showed mercy to Guinevere, the entire legal foundation of his kingdom would be a sham. Every lord, every knight, every commoner would know that the king's justice was subject to his personal feelings. He had no choice. With a heart heavier than stone, King Arthur, the defender of justice, the architect of the Golden Age, condemned his own wife, Queen Guinevere, to be burned alive. The news spread like wildfire. Lancelot, now in exile, was horrified. He would not allow the woman he loved to die such a horrific death. He began to rally his own allies, his own army, preparing to ride on Camelot not as a friend, but as an invader. And in the shadows Mordred watched, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. The fellowship was broken. The kingdom was divided. Brother was about to turn against brother. He had not needed to raise a single banner of rebellion. He had simply held up a mirror to the sins of Camelot and let the kingdom tear itself apart. The pyre for the queen was being built, but it was the dream of the Round Table that was about to go up in flames. The crowd gathered in a silence so profound it felt louder than a scream. This wasn't a celebration of justice. It was a funeral for an ideal. King Arthur sat upon his throne, not in the great hall, but on a dais overlooking the courtyard, a spectator at the execution of his own heart. He was a statue carved from grief, his face an unreadable mask of regal duty. But behind the mask a man was breaking. Every law he had written, every principle he had championed to lift Britain from the mud of barbarism, now formed the iron cage that held him prisoner. To be a king, he had to cease to be a man. To uphold the law, he had to murder his own love. Guinevere was led out, dressed not in royal finery, but in a simple coarse tunic. She walked with a dignity that defied the horror of her sentence. Her eyes found Arthur's, and in that one look, an entire history of love, betrayal, and sorrow was exchanged. There was no accusation in her gaze, only a deep, heartbreaking understanding. This was the price of their world, the price of Camelot. The knights of the Round Table were forced to stand as witnesses, and their division was a visible wound in the court. On one side stood Sir Gawain, his face a thundercloud of grim satisfaction. For him this was justice. Lancelot had not only betrayed the king, but had also been complicit in the death of his brother, Agravain. The queen's execution was a necessary cauterization of a festering wound, but many other knights stood with heads bowed, their hands gripping the hilts of their swords not in readiness, but in frustration. Sir Bors, Sir Ector, Sir Lionel, Lancelot's kin. They watched with simmering rage, their loyalty stretched to the breaking point. And then there were Sir Gareth and Sir Gaheris, Gawain's own beloved younger brothers. They stood near the pyre as part of the honor guard, but they had refused the king's order to bear arms. They would not lift a sword against Sir Lancelot, whom Gareth in particular loved and admired. They would do their duty to the king and guard the queen, but they would do so with empty hands, a quiet protest against the madness that had seized the kingdom. It was a noble gesture, and it would prove to be a fatal one. As the torch was brought forward, a sound began to echo from beyond the castle walls. A faint tremor at first, then a growing thunder. It was the sound of iron hooves on stone, a sound that every knight of Camelot knew. It was the sound of a cavalry charge. Heads turned. A banner crested the hill, a familiar silver and blue, and at its head was a lone figure in shining unadorned steel, a phantom of righteous fury. It was Lancelot. He had not come for parley. He had not come to beg. He had come to answer the breaking of a fellowship with the breaking of a kingdom. Lancelot and his 100 loyal knights descended on the courtyard like a tidal wave of vengeance. There was no strategy, no grand plan, only a singular, desperate objective: reach the queen. The world exploded into chaos. The shriek of steel on steel replaced the suffocating silence. Knights who had been brothers in arms just yesterday now met each other with killing intent. The carefully constructed order of Camelot shattered into 1,000 pieces in a matter of seconds. Lancelot was no longer the gentle, courtly knight. He was a whirlwind of destruction, his sword a blur of silver light and crimson spray. He cut down anyone who stood between him and Guinevere, his mind a red haze of grief and rage. He didn't see faces. He didn't see sigils or crests. He only saw obstacles. In the heart of the melee, Sir Gareth and Sir Gaheris stood their ground, true to their word. They were unarmed, caught between their duty to the king and their love for Lancelot. They raised their empty hands, perhaps to plead, perhaps to show they were no threat. But in the fog of war, in the blood-soaked frenzy of the charge, Lancelot didn't see his friends. He didn't see the young man he had knighted and mentored. He saw only two more figures in the king's livery blocking his path. His sword, guided by instinct and fury, lashed out. Two swift, brutal and impersonal strokes. Gareth and Gaheris fell without a sound. Their noble protest answered with cold, unthinking steel. Lancelot barely registered it. He fought his way to the pyre, cut Guinevere free from her bonds, and lifted her onto his horse. His knights formed a protective circle, and they carved a bloody path back out of the city, leaving behind a scene of carnage and disbelief. They had done the impossible. They had saved the queen. But the cost was incalculable. As the dust settled and the groans of the wounded filled the air, the bodies were counted. Over a dozen knights of the Round Table lay dead, slain by their own comrades. And when the bodies of the two unarmed brothers were discovered, a new kind of horror descended upon the court. Word was sent to Sir Gawain, who had been overseeing the city's outer defenses. The messenger, his face pale, delivered the news in 3 hammer blows. The queen has been rescued, Lancelot has escaped, and your brothers Gareth and Gaheris are dead, slain by Lancelot's own hand. The storytellers say that when Gawain heard this, something inside him broke forever. The man who had once been the epitome of chivalry, the Knight of the Sun, was extinguished. In his place, something terrible was born. His grief was not the quiet sorrow of a brother. It was a supernova of rage that would consume everything it touched. He had accepted the need for war against Lancelot before, but it had been a matter of law and honor. Now it was a blood feud. He stormed into the throne room where Arthur stood amidst the wreckage. The king's face was a canvas of shock and despair. He had lost his wife, his best friend, and his kingdom in a single afternoon. But Gawain felt no pity. He saw only the king whose weakness, whose hesitation, had allowed this to happen. "This is the work of your mercy," Gawain roared, his voice cracking with anguish. "You mourned when you should have acted. Lancelot has not only stolen your queen, he has butchered my family. He has slaughtered my brothers as they stood unarmed. There is no more law. There is no more Round Table. There is only vengeance." Gawain's pain was a poison, and he poured it directly into the open wound of Arthur's heart. Any hope the king might have had of reconciliation, of finding a path back from this abyss, was gone. The raw, primal fury of his greatest surviving knight left him no choice. Gawain's personal vendetta now became the official policy of the kingdom. Lancelot and Guinevere found sanctuary in his mighty fortress of Joyous Gard. They were safe, for the moment, behind its impenetrable walls. But they were not free. They were prisoners of their own actions, haunted by the ghosts of the friends they had killed. The rescue had not been a victory. It had been a tragedy that merely set the stage for a greater one. Back in Camelot, the pyre built for the queen was dismantled. Instead, the forges roared day and night, hammering out swords and spearheads. The dream of a united Britain, of a brotherhood of knights dedicated to justice and peace, was officially over. A new war had begun. This was not a war against Saxon invaders or pagan hordes. It was a war of brother against brother, a civil war that would bleed the kingdom dry. Arthur, pushed by Gawain's unquenchable fire, gathered the greatest army Britain had ever seen, and he marched it not toward the enemy at the gates, but toward the home of the man he once called his friend. The siege of Joyous Gard was about to begin, but as Arthur's banners vanished over the horizon, a shadow fell over the empty throne room of Camelot, a shadow that had been waiting patiently for this very moment to arrive. That shadow was Mordred, and in the king's absence the serpent began to uncoil. While Arthur's great war machine ground its way across Gaul, obsessed with a single castle and a single man, Mordred operated not with armies, but with whispers. He moved through the halls of Camelot, not as a conqueror, but as a concerned steward, a loyal son holding the kingdom together for his absent father. He spoke to the barons who had grown weary of the endless Grail quest and now this new, deeply personal war. He reminded them of the empty state coffers, the fields left untended by conscripted men, The general sense that the dream of the Round Table was fading, replaced by the obsessions of an aging king. His first move was a masterpiece of political poison. Forged letters began to arrive from the continent, sealed with a perfect copy of the royal signet. They carried grim news, telling of a disastrous campaign, of terrible losses, and finally, of the death of King Arthur himself, fallen in battle outside the walls of Joyous Gard. The lie was audacious, but it was perfectly timed. With the king and his best knights gone for months, with no reliable news making its way back across the channel, who was there to dispute it? The letters were read aloud in the great halls and town squares. Grief, then fear, then chaos rippled through the kingdom. Britain was leaderless, a ship without a captain, sailing into a storm. And then Mordred stepped forward. He didn't seize the throne. He claimed he was saving it. He was Arthur's blood, the only one with the authority to prevent the realm from shattering into a dozen petty kingdoms. He promised to end the disastrous foreign war, to bring the boys home, to restore the peace and prosperity that Arthur's vendetta had squandered. To a frightened and war-weary populace, his words were a soothing balm. He was the sensible choice, the steady hand. And so the lords of Britain, the very men who had sworn fealty to Arthur, acclaimed Mordred as their new king and protector of the realm. The betrayal was absolute, accomplished not with a sword, but with a well-crafted lie and the silent consent of a kingdom that had simply grown tired. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, the true king was oblivious, consumed by his own righteous fury. The siege of Joyous Gard was not a glorious campaign. It was a brutal, ugly slog. Lancelot's fortress was one of the strongest in all of Christendom, and his men were loyal to the last. Arthur's army, the finest in the world, shattered itself against the unyielding stone walls. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The summer sun beat down on the English encampment, bringing sickness and rot. Supplies dwindled. Morale plummeted. The Knights of the Round Table, once brothers, now stared across a blood-soaked field at their former champion, and wondered what, exactly, they were dying for. The engine of this entire war, the man stoking Arthur's rage at every turn, was Sir Gawain. His grief for his slain brothers, Gareth and Gaheris, had curdled into a monstrous, all-consuming hatred. He was the first to volunteer for any assault, the last to retreat. Every morning, he would ride to the edge of the moat and scream challenges at the silent walls, his voice raw with fury, demanding Lancelot face him in single combat. For weeks Lancelot refused. He would not raise his sword against the king he still loved, nor against the knights who were once his comrades. He sent messages pleading for a truce, offering any penance Arthur demanded, short of his own life and the queen's. But every offer was rejected. Gawain would not allow it. He whispered in Arthur's ear, reminding him of the betrayal, of the dishonor, twisting the king's grief into an unyielding demand for blood. Finally, worn down by Gawain's relentless accusations of cowardice, Lancelot agreed to meet him. The two armies gathered on the field before the castle to watch the duel that would decide nothing, yet meant everything. As the sun rose, Gawain seemed to grow in stature. This was the source of his legendary power, a gift from a holy man at his birth. His strength waxed for 3 hours in the morning, reaching its peak at noon, and then waned for 3 hours in the afternoon. In the morning sun, he was the most formidable warrior on earth. He advanced on Lancelot like a god of war, his axe, a blur of silver, crashing against Lancelot's shield with blows that could fell an oak tree. Lancelot was a master, perhaps the greatest swordsman the world had ever known, but he was driven back, step by step, by the sheer inhuman force of Gawain's assault. He could only defend, parrying the storm of blows, his arms screaming in protest, his shield splintering under the onslaught. For 3 hours, Gawain was a whirlwind of destruction, and Lancelot was the rock that refused to break. Then the sun passed its zenith. As noon came and went, a subtle change occurred. The force of Gawain's blows lessened just slightly. A hint of fatigue entered his movements. Lancelot saw it. He had weathered the storm. Now it was his turn. With a sudden explosion of speed and skill, Lancelot went on the offensive. His blade was a flicker of light, finding chinks in Gawain's armor, turning aside the now slowing axe, forcing the mighty Orkney knight onto the defensive. The tide had turned. With a final, desperate lunge, Gawain overextended, and Lancelot's sword found its mark, slicing through the armor at his side and cleaving deep into his hip. Gawain roared in pain and fury and collapsed to the ground, his great strength finally failing him. Lancelot stood over his fallen foe, sword point at his throat. The English army held its breath. This was the moment. But Lancelot looked down at the man who was once his friend, the man who had shared 100 campfires and a dozen battles with him, and he could not deliver the final blow. He lowered his sword. "I will not strike a fallen knight," he said, his voice carrying across the silent field. He turned his back and walked away, leaving Gawain alive but defeated and deeply shamed. The wound was grievous. It would never fully heal. And in sparing his life, Lancelot had only deepened Gawain's hatred into something truly pathological. The siege dragged on. Gawain, recovering slowly from his wound, continued to poison Arthur's mind. But as autumn began to chill the air, a ship was spotted, sailing frantically from the English coast. It did not fly the royal standard of Pendragon, but a banner of truce. A lone messenger was brought before the king. He was pale, exhausted, and his hands trembled as he presented a sealed scroll. Arthur broke the seal and read. The color drained from his face. The words on the parchment seemed to burn through his eyes, branding themselves onto his soul. Mordred. His own son, his own nephew, had been named king. The barons had betrayed him. He had been declared dead, a ghost in his own lifetime. And then came the final unthinkable blow. To legitimize his claim, to cement his power and mock Arthur in the most profound way imaginable, Mordred had announced his intention to take Queen Guinevere as his wife and queen. In that moment, the siege, the war, the burning hatred for Lancelot, it all evaporated like mist. It was a foolish, pointless distraction, a vanity. While he had been wasting his army and his honor trying to punish one unfaithful friend, he had lost his entire kingdom to a treacherous son. The world tilted on its axis. Every man he had lost, every drop of blood spilled on this foreign soil was for nothing. He looked up from the scroll, and the eyes that stared out at his knights were the eyes of a broken man. The war with Lancelot was over. A new war, a far more terrible war, was about to begin. He sent a final message to the man in the castle, not of challenge but of grim necessity. A truce was hastily agreed upon. Arthur's great army, battered and depleted, broke camp. They marched back to the coast, their banners tattered, their spirits crushed. They boarded their ships, turning their backs on Gaul forever. As the fleet sailed east, Arthur stood on the deck of his flagship, staring not at the horizon ahead, but at the empty throne he had left behind. He was sailing home to reclaim his kingdom, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was truly sailing towards the end of the world. Mordred had not just stolen his crown, he had stolen his future. And now on the white cliffs of Dover an army was massing, an army flying the Pendragon banner, waiting to greet their former king not with cheers, but with a wall of iron and steel. The heavy bottoms of the landing ships scraped against the shingle of the English shore, a grating, ugly sound that was instantly swallowed by the blare of war horns. There was no negotiation, no parley, only the terrifying sight of Arthur's own dragon banner, the Pendragon sigil, flying over an army sworn to kill him. This was not a foreign invasion, this was a homecoming turned into a slaughter. The ramps crashed down into the surf, and before the water could drain from their greaves, Arthur's veterans were met by a line of shields and a forest of spears. The fighting on the beach was a brutal, intimate affair. Men who had feasted together, who had shared stories by the fire in the great hall of Camelot, now hacked at each other with a desperate fury. It was a chaotic meat grinder, the churn of the tide running red with the blood of Britain. Through it all, Arthur moved like a figure from the old myths, a king forged in the crucible of a dozen such battles. Excalibur was no longer a symbol of justice. It was an instrument of grim necessity, rising and falling, its divine light a terrible beacon in the chaos. He felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow, just a hollow, aching emptiness as he cut down men who had once called him king. At his side fought his nephew Sir Gawain. But this was not the proud, sometimes arrogant, champion of Camelot. This was a man possessed by a ghost, his every blow fueled by a terrible burning regret. He had pushed for this war. His pride, his unyielding demand for vengeance against Lancelot for the death of his brothers, had led them to France. It had emptied the kingdom of its guardians and left the door wide open for the serpent, Mordred. And so he fought with the strength of 10 men, seeking not victory, but perhaps oblivion. He carved a path through Mordred's shield wall, his rage a thing of awesome, terrifying beauty. But rage makes a man blind. A sudden feint, a spear thrust from the side, and the greatest of Orkney's sons staggered, a mortal wound gaping in his side. They won the beach. Mordred's forces, shocked by the ferocity of the king's veterans, broke and fled inland. But the cost was unspeakable. Arthur's men secured the cliffs of Dover not with a triumphant cheer, but with the exhausted silence of survivors. They carried Gawain to a makeshift tent, the king himself refusing to leave his nephew's side. The healers could do nothing. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the blood-soaked sand, Gawain, his voice a strained whisper, asked for a scribe. He dictated a letter, not to his king, but to the man he had hated, the man whose absence was now a wound as deep as the one in his own flesh. He wrote to Lancelot. He confessed his folly, his pride that had shattered the round table and brought ruin upon the kingdom. He told of Mordred's treason, of the desperate battle on the beach, and of the wound that was now pulling the life from him. And in his final words, he begged his former brother-in-arms, his greatest rival, to forgive him, and to come home, to forget the wrongs done to him and to come to Arthur's aid, for the love he once bore the fellowship. It was a final desperate plea to mend what he had broken. Then with the letter sealed, Sir Gawain, the Sun Knight, died as twilight fell over England. Arthur's grief was a cold, hard stone in his chest. He had lost his queen, his best friend, his kingdom, and now his beloved nephew. The march inland was not a triumphant pursuit of a broken enemy. It was a funeral procession. They moved through a land that was now alien to them. Villages were shuttered. The faces that peered out from behind closed doors were filled not with hope, but with fear and suspicion. Who was the true king? The one who had abandoned them for a foreign war, or the one who had stayed, promising stability and strength? Mordred was no mere brute. He was a master of poison, and the poison he used was words. He had spent months turning the realm against its absent king. He told the lesser lords that Arthur's new Christian god had made him weak, that the old ways, the ways of strength and power, were the true heart of Britain. He promised land and titles to any who would join him. He forged alliances with the Saxons, the very enemies Arthur had spent a lifetime holding at bay, promising them the eastern shores in exchange for their swords. He painted Arthur as a tired old man, obsessed with personal vendettas, while presenting himself as the vibrant, decisive future of the kingdom. He was dismantling Camelot not just with an army, but with an idea, that the dream of a united, just kingdom was a lie, and that only power mattered. As Arthur pushed west, news of Mordred's growing strength was a constant, bitter wind. Lords who had sworn eternal fealty to him now sent riders with messages of refusal, their banners joining Mordred's ever-swelling host. The kingdom was fracturing along old fault lines, the unity Arthur had forged now cracking and crumbling into dust. Every league they marched, Arthur saw the decay. He saw the dream of Camelot dying in the fearful eyes of his own people. He was no longer a liberator. He was just one side in a civil war, a warlord fighting for a crown that felt heavier and colder than ever before. He was haunted by Merlin's prophecies, words he had dismissed in his youth that now echoed in his mind with chilling clarity. The serpent hatched from his own blood. The final battle in the west. He felt the crushing weight of destiny, the sense that his own choices, his passion for Guinevere, his love for Lancelot, his pride, had all been threads in a tapestry of doom woven long ago. But he could not turn back. To retreat would be to surrender Britain to the darkness Mordred courted. Honor, that rigid, unyielding code that had defined his entire reign, now served as his cage, forcing him forward on a path he knew led only to desolation. The two armies shadowed each other across the breadth of southern Britain. There were skirmishes, bloody encounters at river crossings and fortified towns, but both kings knew this was simply a prelude. Both were maneuvering, gathering their full strength for one final cataclysmic confrontation that would settle the fate of the island for a generation. Mordred, with his Saxon allies and legions of disaffected lords, fell back, drawing Arthur deeper into the heart of the land, towards the ancient, mist-shrouded lands of the west. Finally, the scouts returned with the news. Mordred had made his stand. He had chosen his ground, a wide, sloping plain in the land of Lyonesse, bordered by the sea. The name of the place was Camelot. It was a name that sounded like a death knell. As Arthur's army made camp and the watchfires were lit, They could see the enemy's fires twinkling back across the dark plain. 1,000 points of hateful light. There were no more messages to be sent, no more ground to be won. The time for maneuvering was over. Across that field stood his son, his betrayer, and the end of all his dreams. Tomorrow, the sun would rise on the last day of Camelot. The air on Salisbury Plain was thick with a cold, wet mist, clinging to the ground like a shroud. Dawn broke not with a blaze of glory, but with a reluctant pearly-gray light that revealed two armies, two ghosts of a single nation, poised on the edge of oblivion. For Arthur, this was not a battlefield. It was a graveyard for his dreams. Every man standing across that field, arrayed under Mordred's dragon banner, was a man he had sworn to protect. A Briton. Some he may have knighted himself. Some may have children who had cheered his name in the streets of Camelot. Now their swords were aimed at his heart. He looked down his own lines. The veterans, the loyalists, the last remnants of the Round Table. Men like Sir Lucan the butler and his brother, Sir Bedivere. Their faces were grim, etched with the weariness of a dozen campaigns, but now shadowed by a sorrow that went deeper than fear. They weren't just fighting an enemy. They were fighting the future they had been promised, now twisted into a nightmare. There was no glory to be won here, only an end. Across the field, Mordred felt the thrum of power. He had the numbers. He had the youth. He had the righteous fury of the dispossessed. He saw Arthur not as a father, but as a symbol of an old world that had cast him aside. To his men he was the future, a strong, decisive leader, unburdened by old oaths and prophecies. He was promising them a new Britain, forged in the fire of this final battle. He was promising them victory, but as he looked at the stoic, unmoving line of Arthur's Pendragon banner, a flicker of doubt, cold as the morning dew, touched his heart. This was the man who had pulled a sword from a stone, who had united a kingdom, who had defeated the Saxons time and again. This was a living legend, and legends are notoriously hard to kill. The two leaders had agreed to a parley, a final, desperate attempt to avert the slaughter. Each brought 14 of their most trusted knights to the center of the field. The armies watched, two great beasts holding their breath. Words were exchanged, hollow and heavy with mistrust. Terms were offered, impossible to accept. It was a pantomime of peace, a final courtesy before the butchery began. They were on the verge of turning away, of giving the signal that would unleash hell, when fate, in its infinite cruelty, intervened. An adder, a venomous snake disturbed from its sleep in the heather, slithered out into the open space between the two parties. It struck, sinking its fangs into the ankle of one of Mordred's knights. The man cried out in shock and pain, and his instinct, the instinct of a warrior, took over. He drew his sword, a flash of polished steel in the gray light, to kill the serpent. That was all it took. To the tense, watching armies, that single glint of metal was not an act against a snake. It was a signal. It was betrayal. A roar went up from both sides, a sound of pure primal fury. The parley was a trap. Trumpets blared, a discordant, panic call to arms. The time for words was vaporized in an instant of misunderstanding. The two forces surged forward, a tide of men and iron, and the Battle of Camelot began not with a strategic command, but with a snakebite. The first crash of shield on shield was like the cracking of the world. The front lines met in a brutal, grinding collision. This was not the elegant swordplay of tournament jests. This was a meat grinder. It was the grim reality of Dark Age warfare. Men pushed, heaved, and stabbed over the tops of their shields and through the gaps. Spears splintered. Axes thudded into wood and bone. The air filled with the screams of the wounded and the guttural war cries of the living. The ground, already soft from the mist, quickly turned into a slick red mud, a treacherous mire of blood and earth that sucked at the boots of the combatants. Arthur was in the thick of it, Excalibur a blur of light in the chaos. He was no longer a king directing from the rear. He was a warrior, a soldier, fighting for every inch of his dying kingdom. He moved with a grim economy of motion born from a lifetime of war. Beside him, his loyal knights formed a wall, a small island of order in a sea of anarchy. They fought back to back, a dwindling brotherhood, their legendary armor dented and smeared with filth. For hours the battle raged with no clear victor. Lines broke and reformed. Small pockets of men were surrounded and cut down. It was a chaotic, swirling melee of personal duels and desperate stands. A man would see his neighbor, a man he'd shared ale with the night before, fall with a spear in his throat, and he would surge forward with a cry of grief and rage, only to be cut down himself moments later. The dream of Camelot, the fellowship of a united Britain, was being hacked to pieces man by man on this bloody field. As the day wore on, the sheer number of Mordred's forces began to tell. Arthur's veterans were falling. The line grew thinner. The field was now carpeted with the dead and dying, a grotesque tapestry of the kingdom's finest. Arthur, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body a canvas of bruises and minor wounds, looked around at the devastation. He saw Sir Lucan struggling to his feet, a terrible wound in his side. He saw Bedivere, his shield shattered, fighting on with only his sword. Of the hundreds who had marched with him, only a handful remained standing. And then through a gap in the fighting he saw him, Mordred, standing near a pile of the slain, his armor relatively clean, his banner still held high beside him. He had been directing his troops, letting his army bleed for him. In that moment all of Arthur's grief, all his sorrow for his broken kingdom and his fallen knights, coalesced into a single burning point of white-hot rage. The prophecies, the warnings of Gawain's ghost, it had all led to this. To this one man, this product of his own sin, who had undone everything. He turned to Bedivere. "The traitor," Arthur rasped, his voice raw. "He lives, and he has caused all this misery. Now give me my spear. For I see the man who will be the death of me, and I will be the death of him." Bedivere pleaded with him. "Sire, let him be. You have won the field, for he is the last of his army. God has been good to you today. For the love of all we have fought for, do not seek him out. Remember what the spirit of Sir Gawain told you. If you fight him, you will die." But Arthur was beyond reason. He was a force of nature, a king driven by a fate he could no longer outrun. He took his great spear, Rhongomyniad, and ignored the pleas of his last loyal friend. He saw only his son, his betrayer, the man who had set the world on fire. Seeing Arthur coming, Mordred's face hardened. This was the moment, the final contest. He raised his own sword and shield and braced himself. The last two dragons of Britain advanced on each other across a field of their own making. Arthur charged, his old warhorse finding one last burst of strength. He leveled his spear, aiming for Mordred's heart. Mordred stood his ground, a figure of defiant ambition. The impact was titanic. Arthur's spear struck Mordred square in the chest, punching straight through his shield, through his armor, and deep into his body. The force of the blow was so great it lifted Mordred from his feet. It was a mortal wound, a king's justice delivered with brutal finality. But as the life began to drain from him, Mordred performed one last, terrible act of defiance. With a final inhuman surge of strength and hatred, he pulled himself up the shaft of the spear. He forced his body along the cold, piercing iron until he was face to face with his father. And as Arthur stared in shock and horror, Mordred swung his own sword with all his remaining might. The blade crashed down upon Arthur's helmet. The steel of the helmet, forged by masters, shrieked and split. The blow sheared through it, biting deep into the skull of the king. For a moment they were locked in that fatal embrace. The father who had impaled his son, and the son who had shattered his father's head. Then Mordred's strength failed. His sword fell from his grasp, and his body slid lifelessly from the spear, crashing to the blood-soaked ground. Arthur swayed in his saddle. The world swam before his eyes, a red haze of pain and fading light. He fell from his horse, Excalibur clattering beside him. The great king, the victor of a dozen battles, the hope of Britain, lay mortally wounded on the field of his last, most tragic victory. The fighting faltered. The few remaining combatants on both sides saw their leaders fall, and the rage simply died within them, replaced by a profound, hollow exhaustion. Silence began to reclaim the field, a silence broken only by the groans of the dying. The Battle of Camelot was over, and everyone had lost. The lone survivors stumbled through the wreckage of their world, ghosts on a field of ghosts. Among them, one of the last of the Round Table, Sir Bedivere, searched desperately for his king. He found Arthur near the body of Mordred, propped against a broken cart, his golden armor stained crimson, his face ashen. Another knight, Sir Lucan, was with him, his own guts spilling from a wound he ignored. Together, they tried to lift their king, to carry him from this butcher's yard. But the strain was too much for Lucan. His wound, held in by sheer will, burst open. He collapsed and died at his king's feet, a final futile act of loyalty. Now only Bedivere remained. He wept, not just for Lucan, not just for the thousands lying dead, but for the light that was fading from Arthur's eyes. The king's voice was a dry whisper, a rustle of autumn leaves. He had one final command. "Take you Excalibur," he breathed, his hand gesturing to the legendary sword lying beside him, its jewels still catching the dying light. "Go with it to the water's side, and throw my sword in that water." Bedivere, his heart a stone in his chest, took up the sacred blade. The weight of it was the weight of a kingdom, of a dream. He walked to the edge of the nearby lake, its surface dark and still as glass. He lifted the sword, the hilt a masterpiece of gold and gems, the blade itself humming with a power that felt alive. How could he throw away the symbol of Camelot, the last remnant of their glory? To cast it into the dark water felt like the ultimate admission of failure. So he didn't. He hid the sword among the reeds and returned to Arthur. "What saw you there?" the king asked, his eyes closed. "Sir," Bedivere lied, "I saw nothing but the winds and the waves." Arthur's eyes opened, and in them was a flicker of the old fire, a deep, profound disappointment. "That is untruly said," Arthur rasped. "You have betrayed me. You have not done my commandment. Go now, and do as I bid you, as you are lief and dear to me." Shamed, Bedivere went again to the water's edge. He drew Excalibur from the reeds. Its beauty was intoxicating. It was history. It was power. It was everything they had fought for. To lose it was to lose the memory of the sun. Once more his courage failed him. He hid the sword a second time and returned. "What saw you there?" Arthur asked again, his voice even weaker. "Sir," Bedivere said, "I saw nothing but the water wap and the waves wan." A terrible anger gave Arthur a final surge of strength. "Ah, traitor! Untrue!" he cried out, trying to push himself up. "Now you have betrayed me twice. Who would have thought that you, who have been to me so lief and dear, would for a rich sword betray me? You have delayed, and my time is short. For I have taken cold from my wound, and I will soon be gone. Go now, and if you do not do as I command, I shall slay you with my own hands." The threat from a man who could barely breathe struck Bedivere to his very soul. He ran to the lake, his heart breaking with every step. He did not look at the sword this time. He closed his eyes, swung the blade in a great arc, and hurled it with all his might out over the water. It spun end over end, a flash of silver and gold against the gray sky. And then the miracle. As the sword neared the water's surface, an arm clad in white samite rose from the depths. A hand, graceful and otherworldly, caught the hilt of Excalibur in midair, brandished it 3 times, and then drew it down into the silent water, vanishing without a ripple. The magic that had begun Arthur's reign had now returned to claim its own. Bedivere ran back to his king, his mind reeling. He told Arthur what he had seen. A faint smile touched Arthur's lips. "Help me from hence," he whispered, "for I fear I have tarried too long." Bedivere, with tears streaming down his face, lifted his king, his body shockingly light, and carried him to the shore. There, waiting at the water's edge, was a black barge. And in the barge were 3 queens in black hoods, their faces pale and sorrowful in the twilight. Among them was Arthur's own sister, the enchantress Morgan Le Fay. As Bedivere laid Arthur gently in the barge, Morgan Le Fay took her brother's head in her lap. "Ah, my dear brother," she lamented. "Why have you tarried so long from me? Alas, this wound on your head has caught overmuch cold." The barge began to drift slowly away from the shore, a phantom vessel carrying away the soul of Britain. Arthur turned his head and looked at his last knight. "Comfort yourself," he said, his voice a thread. "For in me is no trust for to trust in. I will go into the vale of Avilion to heal me of my grievous wound. And if you hear no more of me, pray for my soul." Bedivere stood alone on the shore, a solitary figure against the vast, empty landscape. He watched as the barge grew smaller and smaller, a dark shape moving toward the horizon, until it was swallowed by the mists. He screamed into the emptiness, a cry of pure desolation. "Ah, my lord Arthur, what shall become of me? Now you go from me and I am left here alone among my enemies." But the only answer was the sigh of the wind and the lapping of the water. The age of heroes was over. He wandered for days, a man hollowed out by grief. He eventually came upon a small hermitage in the woods, where a hermit was praying before a newly made tomb. Bedivere asked the hermit whose tomb it was. The old man explained that at midnight, a company of ladies had brought a corpse and 100 tapers and had begged him to bury it, offering 100 gold coins for his service. Bedivere fell to his knees. He knew in his heart that it was his lord, King Arthur. He cast off his armor, put on the simple robes of a hermit, and resolved to spend the rest of his days right there, fasting and praying beside the grave of the king he had served, the king he had loved. But the story told by the grave itself was different. The legend says that an inscription was carved upon the stone, a final riddle that would echo through the centuries. It did not speak of an ending, but of a long sleep. It did not speak of a king who was dead, but of a king who was waiting. The words, written in Latin, became the foundation of a new hope, a promise whispered in the darkest hours of the nation he had built. Hic ius et Arthurus, rex quondam, rex que futurus. Here lies Arthur, the once and future king. It's a phrase more powerful than any sword, more enduring than any kingdom. Not a statement of fact, but a declaration of faith. It transformed Arthur from a fallen warlord into an immortal idea, a promise that in times of greatest need, a leader of immense virtue and strength would return to unite and save his people. This wasn't just a story, it was a prophecy, a seed of hope planted in the heart of Britain, waiting for the right moment to grow. And for centuries, that hope was a dangerous revolutionary force, especially for the Norman kings who now ruled England. They saw how the Welsh and the Britons clung to this prophecy, how the belief in Arthur's return fueled rebellion after rebellion. The ghost of Arthur was a threat to their throne. And so, in the year 1191, King Henry II's court orchestrated what can only be described as a masterstroke of medieval propaganda. At Glastonbury Abbey, a place long associated with Avalon, the monks made a stunning announcement. They claimed to have unearthed a massive oak coffin, buried 16 feet deep. Inside, they said, were the skeletons of a huge man, over 7 feet tall, and a woman with golden hair. And most importantly, a lead cross lay with them, bearing a Latin inscription. Here lies the renowned King Arthur, with Guinevere his second wife, in the Isle of Avalon. The discovery was an international sensation, but it was also incredibly convenient. By producing a body, King Henry and the monks of Glastonbury achieved two critical goals. First, they proved to the rebellious Welsh that their hero was well and truly dead. There would be no magical return. The future was Norman, not British. Second, it brought a flood of pilgrims and their money to Glastonbury, making the abbey rich and powerful. They were literally cashing in on Camelot. Was it real? Almost certainly not. The inscription's lettering style was from the 12th century, not the 6th. The discovery was a politically motivated hoax, an attempt to kill a myth by giving it a grave. But they underestimated the power of the story. You cannot bury an idea. In fact, by trying to control the narrative, they only made it stronger. Arthur was now officially recognized, his legend cemented in stone and legitimized by the crown itself. The myth had escaped the control of kings and politicians. It was now in the hands of poets and storytellers, who would shape it into the form we recognize today. The most important of these was a man named Sir Thomas Malory. In the 15th century, while locked away in prison, Malory took the sprawling, contradictory mess of French romances and Welsh legends and forged them into a single epic masterpiece, La Mort d'Arthur, The Death of Arthur. This was the book that gave us everything. It codified the love triangle between Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere, turning it into the central tragedy that tears the kingdom apart. It established Sir Galahad as the perfect, holy knight who achieves the quest for the Holy Grail. It gave us the definitive versions of Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, and the fatal final battle with Mordred. Malory's Arthur wasn't just a warlord. He was a complex, tragic figure, a good man struggling to hold a perfect ideal together in an imperfect world. His book, one of the first printed in English, became the blueprint for every Arthurian story that followed. The legend faded for a time, dismissed as medieval fantasy during the Enlightenment. But like Arthur himself, it was only sleeping. In the 19th century, during the height of the British Empire, the Victorians were desperate for a national hero, a symbol of their own ideals of honor, duty, and Christian morality. They found him in Camelot. The poet Alfred Lord Tennyson spent over 40 years writing his epic poem, Idylls of the King. He stripped away some of the messier, more human elements of Malory's tale and presented Arthur as a near-perfect Christ-like figure, whose ideal kingdom is destroyed by the sins of lesser men. This was Arthur as the ultimate gentleman, the moral compass for an age of industrial change and imperial ambition. From there, the legend exploded. It became a global phenomenon. Mark Twain sent a Connecticut Yankee to his court. Titch White reimagined him for children in The Sword in the Stone. Hollywood gave him a sword, a song, and a legion of devoted fans. The story of a just king, a circle of equals, a quest for something holy, and a tragic fall from grace proved to be infinitely adaptable. Which brings us back, after this long journey through history, propaganda, and poetry, to the fundamental question. Who was he? Was King Arthur real? The frustrating and perhaps beautiful answer is we don't know for sure. There is no contemporary archaeological evidence. No mention of King Arthur, in the only surviving historical text from the period, written by the monk Gildas. The man we know from the stories, the king with the magic sword, the round table, and the castle at Camelot, is a literary creation, a composite character built over 1,000 years. But that doesn't mean there's nothing there. The historical consensus points to a kernel of truth, a real person, not a king but a commander, a Romano-British leader, perhaps named Artorius, who lived around the year 500 AD, a professional soldier, trained in the fading traditions of the Roman legions, who organized the fractured British kingdoms and led a brilliant cavalry force against the Saxon invaders. A man who, for a brief, shining moment, halted the tide of darkness and won a series of stunning victories, culminating in the great battle at Mount Badon. This man, this Dux Bellorum or Duke of Battles, was so successful, so charismatic, that his memory was never allowed to die. His deeds became the stuff of legend, told and retold around campfires and in the halls of kings. Over time, storytellers added the magic, the romance, and the prophecy. They gave him a wizard, a magic sword, a perfect queen, and a fellowship of knights. They took the memory of a real warrior and built a myth around him. So, in a way, the answer is yes. Arthur was real, but not in the way we might think. He wasn't one man. He is two things at once. First, he is the ghost of a historical figure, a British warlord whose victories bought his people a generation of peace. And second, he is the embodiment of an idea that has echoed through Western civilization for 1,500 years. The idea that leadership should be earned through merit, not birthright. The idea that might should be used for right. The idea of a round table where all are equal and have a voice. The idea that even in the face of betrayal and defeat, the struggle for a better, more just world is a noble one. The idea that even when the kingdom falls, hope remains. The search for the historical Arthur is, in the end, a quest for our own Holy Grail. We may never find the definitive proof, the one artifact that says Arthur was here. But the search itself is what matters. Because in searching for Arthur, we are really searching for the best in ourselves. We are searching for Camelot, not as a place on a map, but as a possibility within our own society. An ideal of justice, equality, and courage that we still strive for today. The legend does not endure because it tells us about a king who once lived. It endures because it tells us about the kind of world we wish we lived in, and the kind of leaders we wish we had. It is more than a story. It is a mirror, reflecting our highest aspirations and our deepest fears. And it carries a timeless promise, that when darkness falls and all seems lost, a hero will rise. The king who was and the king who will be. The once and future king.